Well, if you've ever found yourself saying, I just couldn't help myself when you ate too much of the wrong food, you just might be right. A lot of people put a lot of work into making sure we keep on eating. As our health reporter Kelly Crow discovered, it's a highly competitive, highly secretive industry with one goal: food that is simply irresistible.
They're trying to increase their share of your stomach and increase the amount of profit they're making off the food you eat.
I ate to the point that it hurt to move, and I would just lie in my bed and wish I was dead.
These companies rely on deep science and pure science to understand how we're attracted to food and how they can make their foods attractive to us.
There's science behind that crunch. Yogurt feels that way in your mouth for a reason. The food industry is even researching the connection between the taste receptors on your tongue and the corresponding chemical reaction in your brain. The result? Carefully engineered combinations of salt, sugar, fat, and chemicals deliberately designed so you can't eat just one. Michael Moss spent 4 years investigating the science behind processed food.
I was totally surprised. I spent time with the top scientists at the largest companies in this country, and it's amazing how much math and science and regression analysis and energy they put into finding the very perfect amount of salt, sugar, and fat in their products that'll send us over the moon.
A search through a database of scientific papers and food industry patents reveals the extent of the science behind food engineering. Chemistry, physics, biology, all commandeered into the service of making profitable food. Here's a process for enhancing the cheese flavor without the cheese, where starting materials are proteins and fats, which means the amount of expensive cheese can be reduced substantially.
And if they can replicate that chemical reaction that may happen on your tongue or an aroma, they can simulate the taste of something without it being at all real.
Bruce Bradley knows firsthand what goes on inside the food industry. A former executive at several large food companies, he's now a writer and industry critic.
There were certainly times that I felt uncomfortable or troubled by what I was doing, and I think that's ultimately, one of the reasons why I left the industry. And then you see trends like obesity and health issues that are increasing, mainly driven by the food that we eat. It was hard for me not to just take a more thorough assessment of what I was doing.
The food industry is extremely secretive, competitive, and proprietary. It took years and hundreds of interviews before Michael Moss could finish his book.
This was like a detective story for me, getting inside the companies with thousands of pages of inside documents and getting their scientists and executives to reveal to me the secrets of how they go at this.
What did he find? That the food processing industry rests on 3 pillars: salt, sugar, and fat.
Well, these are the holy trinity of processed foods. And again, when they hit the perfect amounts, they call it the bliss point for sugar, the mouthfeel for fat, the flavor burst for salt. They know that their products will be irresistible.
Salt, sugar, and fat in combinations nature never intended. And increasingly, scientists agree there is evidence that these highly palatable foods can be addictive.
Yeah, well, for me, I'll be spooning or reaching or whatever, and I'll be thinking, I've got to stop, I've got to stop, I've got to stop, and I just don't stop.
Her name is Pat, and she's a food addict.
I was desperate when I was a food addict. It was really, really devastating, and I felt powerless and ashamed, and it was horrible.
Her kitchen is a battleground. Every meal a challenge to remember that for her, even a taste of sugar can set her back.
Seeing food will trigger it. Advertising for food will trigger it. These foods are so addictive, so appealing.
Every cookie is crammed with joy.
There are many food addicts who say that even long after the food stopped causing us joy, long after it started causing us misery, we still couldn't stop.
How about one of those chips?
Just one.
So it becomes hardwired, and it's very hard to overcome.
Bet you can't eat just one.
And while the industry hates the word addiction more than any other word, the fact of the matter is that their research has shown them that when they hit the very perfect amounts of each of those ingredients, they'll send us over the moon. Their products will fly off the shelf, we'll eat more, we'll buy more, and as they are companies, they will make more money.
We're activating those limbic structures.
Francis McGlone is a neuroscientist.
Brain system.
As part of a BBC program, he put a British chef into a brain imaging machine and fed him chili
Every 38 seconds, Ashley had a drop of chili oil squirted on his tongue.
and watched as the heat from the chili peppers triggered a release of feel-good chemicals in the brain.
The consequence of that low level of pain is that it floods the brain with its own natural opiates.
Francis McGlone was a pioneer, one of the first neuroscientists to work in the food industry. He spent 10 years doing neuroscience for Unilever, one of the world's largest food companies.
As a basic neuroscientist, I was able to look at the mechanisms that basically drove preference for various types of food.
Using neuroscience, Unilever made headlines with this finding: ice cream tickles the brain. Just one spoonful lights up the happy zones of the brain in clinical trials, the company reported. This is the other part of the body that fascinates food scientists: the mouth, the way food breaks between the teeth, the pressure of the bite force, the sound of the crunch.
It's the noise, and the noise, of course, amplified by the fact that your jawbone is connected to your ears, and you really hear that crunch quite loudly as you bite. But it's also the physical requirement to chew on something and to crunch it. Just distracts you. It pulls your mind onto what you're eating.
Chris Luckhurst is a food industry consultant who helps companies come up with foods that are what he calls more-ish. In other words, make you want more.
They want you, at the end of each product, to reach for the next one and put it in again. And they often achieve that by having a very intense taste hit right at the front of the mouth, and then it dies off very quickly. And so by the time you've finished each mouthful, you're looking to refine that taste which you've lost.
The shape of the food is also important. Chocolate should not have sharp edges.
Absolutely. We're looking for chocolate to be comforting, to be a really pleasant, lovely experience in the mouth. Melt is a very soft experience, and if it's got sharp corners, you're really spoiling that and actually setting the consumer on edge slightly before they get the melt.
Food scientists know what it takes to trigger the brain to stop eating. They call it sensory-specific satiety.
And that's an expression that says when foods have one overriding flavor, if it's attractive, it'll be really attractive to us initially, but then we'll get tired of it really fast. And so these companies make a concerted effort to make their foods not bland, but really well blended.
And why can't you stop at just one? It's called vanishing caloric density.
Vanishing caloric density applies to those things like Cheetos that melt in your mouth. And what happens is then that your brain gets fooled into thinking the calories have vanished. And you're much more apt to keep eating before the brain sends you a signal, hey, you've had enough.
Welcome to the Sensory Sciences Lab at the University of Guelph.
Can one person from each group come here for a minute? This is teaching the students how to set up a sensory test. So all the students in this class are learning the basics of conducting sensory evaluation research, because it's not as simple as eating a food. They're different in ingredients, and what we're looking for is to determine which one is preferred or accepted by people. So in this case, it's actually a different sodium levels.
So which one did you like better?
I liked the second one better.
The salty one?
The saltier one, yeah.
Because these products must be able to sit on the shelves for months, many of the ingredients have nothing to do with taste, but act as preservatives and chemicals to control the appearance and texture, and a series of ingredients known as flavor enhancers to trick the brain into tasting something that isn't there.
There's tremendous amounts of money spent behind creating tastes and smells that feel real, but in reality are completely artificial.
Because without flavor enhancement, no one would eat it.
It would taste horrible. You would just, you'd want to spit it out.
One food company made a special batch of crackers for Michael Moss to taste without any salt at all.
It was a god-awful experience tasting those things. Normally, I can eat Cheez-Its all day long, but the Cheez-Its without the salt, I couldn't even swallow them. They stuck to the roof of my mouth.
A tour of the grocery aisle reveals that something is changing. Suddenly, cookies boast health claims. Chips have whole grain and fiber.
If the food industry can find a way to market it and make money off of it, I'm sure they will. But if it long-term is decreasing the amount of food that they can sell, I don't see it as being an avenue that they'll go down.
So whether lower in salt, sugar, or fat, higher in fiber and grains, containing real fruit or baked with real vegetables, you will be back for more. The food industry depends on it.
At MIT in Boston, Professor Kay Tai has made a startling new discovery. Using laboratory mice and rats, she's attached a cable that sends signals directly into the pleasure centers of their brains.
So basically what we found was that when we recorded from these neurons, initially thought, oh, maybe they'll respond to sucrose, maybe they'll respond to this or that. Actually, what they responded to, not the sucrose itself, but they were responding to the learned action of seeking the sucrose. And so for me, I think the analogy is sometimes I get up and go to the refrigerator without actually eating anything, but I still do it. And it's this habit, and it's a habit associated with an action of reward seeking that I've done many, many times.
You know, it's so interesting for me what you've just said, because when I was on a diet last year, I actually thought I was going mad, and I'll tell you why. Because I would go to the shops and I would get some type of pleasure out of buying the crisps, the chocolate, the pies, all of the foods that I would have eaten, but I knew I wasn't going to eat them. And I couldn't understand why I still was getting pleasure or wanted to do that. So now you're explaining.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. It's this habit that you've done this so many times, and then habits can lead to compulsive behavior.
This compulsion is so strong that once addicted to food, some of us aren't able to stop ourselves from seeking reward. The same neural pathway lights up in our brain every time.
If these neurons are encoding these habits of reward seeking, if we used this tool that we have called optogenetics to activate just these specific neurons, would we be able to make the animal engage in compulsive reward seeking, compulsive sucrose seeking?
Look at what happens to this rat when Kay switches on the reward center in its brain. It seeks out the sugar. Now look at this. If the mouse reaches out for the sugar, this time it's given an electric shock. But because Kay is activating the reward center in its brain, it's compelled to seek out the sugar anyway, even if it's getting that shock. Amazing. Now let's look at what happens when the rat is placed in an area where there is no sugar and the reward trigger is switched on in its brain again.
Here, when we turn the light on, you can see that right away the animal starts licking the floor, kind of behaving this, frenzied manner, and the animal licks the floor. There's nothing in the chamber for the animal to actually eat.
So it's not actually tasting anything off the floor. It's not getting any stimulus because there's nothing there.
It's a completely clean floor.
And yet, whatever way its brain's being stimulated, it's continuing to want to lick the floor, to eat.
That's right.
It's in a frenzy.
And then you'll see next the animal actually does something really remarkable. Even though there's nothing there to pick up, it will actually go through the motions of picking up a non-existent object and engaging in this elaborate feeding sequence.
In the same way that we see that mouse licking the floor frantically, if you imagine what goes on inside our imagination, like I sometimes sit at night and I imagine myself licking chips, licking crisps, licking the salt off it. I know that sounds insane, but I do. Is there much between me imagining that and creating that fantasy in my head and a mouse licking that little box that it's trapped in?
I can definitely imagine that it's similar. I mean, of course, I don't know what the mouse's experience is like, but that mouse's behavior definitely reminds me of experiences that I have had. So in that way, I agree with you.
This house in Chelmsford, Essex, has become a prison for 39-year-old Sharon. Bedbound because of her size, with the exception of hospital visits, Sharon has not left her room in almost 10 years.
I feel like I don't have a life at the moment. I just feel I'm just existing. It does get to you being shut in the room all the time, not be able to leave the room. Most of the time I do have those curtains drawn. I don't really like myself one bit. There's not one part of me that I do like of myself. I mean, people tell me that I'm a nice person, but I don't really believe. I think they're just saying that to be nice.
Sharon is incapable of looking after herself and relies on her family for everything. Her mum, Anne, comes every morning to wash her and helps her to the toilet, which is also in her bedroom.
I think she's used to it now. The carers used to do it, and then she'd have all different carers, different faces, like every other day, and that was degrading for her.
Feels good.
Some of them would just, just give her dirty looks, and how did you ever get this fat? And they couldn't understand it. No one can, not unless you've really been overweight. I don't think anyone else can understand her situation.
Anne used to be overweight herself, so understands exactly how her daughter suffers.
I'm in pain most of the time because I'm always sitting in the same position, and with all my sores and stuff as well, it doesn't help. I just don't like myself or what I've become and how much it's changed me. And I was a happy, bubbly person before, and it's just changed my whole mood. I'm just so angry all the time and depressed, and I just want to be able to get out of that. I just don't like looking into mirrors. I just find it very hard because it just doesn't feel real at times. That how did I let it get this bad, and how did I not notice when the weight was going on?
Even the simple task of being washed exhausts Sharon. She needs oxygen day and night as she struggles to breathe because of the pressure of her weight on her lungs. It's a constant worry for Mum, Anne.
Let's face it, she's not going to live very long in her condition. I'm worried about her dying in her sleep when she has difficulties in breathing. She's constantly on the phone to me. If I don't hear from her, I'm constantly on the phone to her. Sometimes, she cries over the phone to me that she can't go on as she is.
Sharon has a serious addiction to food. For years, she's tried and failed to control it.
I find food as comfort, and I enjoy it at the time of eating it, and then I feel depressed afterwards because I have. It's just like a vicious circle, and it just can't stop. That I feel like it's controlling me. This is making me realise what I've done to myself. Right. Food is... I tend to turn to food because it's my friend, and at the end of the day, that's what makes me happy. Because I don't have anyone else to fill that gap. It feels I'm alone all the time, being shut in this room 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I don't see the outside. It's no life for me.
Sharon uses the internet to order most of her food and takes deliveries throughout the week.
That's one of the substitute items.
Right, okay.
Okay, that's heavy.
Okay, that'll be it for now. I'll sort these out. Thank you.
The pleasure Sharon gets from food is stronger than the fear that her addiction is killing her.
Right, this is my stuff for later. My treats that no one else gets to see. My boost, my picnics. My sherbets. More M&Ms. Marshmallows. Right. And I'm going to put all this stuff under my cupboard for later, because I hide them so that no one else can see what I eat. So otherwise, they take it away from me. And that makes me feel safe. They make me happy when I'm eating them. So they're for later.
But there is a darker side to Sharon's addiction. She suffers from serious depression and will often harm herself as a way of trying to cope with the pain of her obesity and her feelings of low self-worth. Her family often comply with her demands for food because they are scared of what she'll do if they don't.
Food to Sharon makes her really happy. Nothing else can make her happy. Not her husband, not her children, not even me. Food. She's addicted to food. It's her friend, it's her comfort, it's everything to her, the food. She'll just scream and shout and, until she gets it. I just say, no, Mum, I've got to have it. You don't understand. I've got to have it. Or I'll do something else. Meaning, she'll be cutting herself. That gives her relief, she says, the cutting. But that I can't understand, the cutting. The food bit, yes, it does make you happy. But the cutting, I can't understand the cutting.
Time for lunch. Yeah. Lovely. What's that, chicken? Yeah, chicken and rice soup. Yeah, oh, lovely. It stops me feeling bad. Nicely, that's all right. When you put that food in your mouth, you want more, and you never really feel satisfied. You never feel full up. It's like you want more and you can't stop. And sometimes I feel like it's easier to take it out myself, at least I won't put the weight on. And that's why I tend to self-harm, just to stop that feeling in my head and that empty feeling in my stomach. Like when I've done it, I feel good at the time, and then it's just the same as the food. Then it doesn't last long. It comes back, and it comes back 10 times worse.
Sharon is separated from her husband, Michael, but 3 of their 4 children live at home with her. 16-year-old Paige and 15-year-old twins, Jade and Emra. Sharon feels her obesity has prevented her from being a proper mum to them.
I feel missed out a lot on the children growing up and not be able to go out with them and stuff, and not be able to take them to school or go to the meetings or when they had their plays at school. And
I think it mostly affects these two because they're like mother and daughter. They normally go out shopping and stuff, and they're missing out.
Yes.
All our other friends go out like outings with their family, shopping or with their mum. Well, we can't do that, so we just go by Nan.
Nana, you won that game.
You won that game, then?
Yes, I know, because it was way out.
Yeah, all right.
First time, innit?
It's out.
I feel guilty because when we're on the trampoline having fun, she doesn't get to go on it, but she'll buy the stuff, but she doesn't get to use it. And she just sees the pictures or looks through the window.
What's the nice thing about her mum? She's just, she might be like that, stuck in bed, but nothing can stop it. She really wants us to have fun outside.
Sharon tries hard to protect her children from the devastating effect her weight has on her. But as her obesity becomes more and more disabling, she fears that time is running out for her.
I've let it go on too long as it is, and I'm scared that if I don't do anything about it, that it's going to beat me. It's going to be too late, and I want to get back out there for my children, to be able to catch up on the time I've missed with them, and to make up that lost time before it is too late, because I don't want to leave my children without a mother.